Hello. Today I want to talk about what is enlightenment. Now, okay, I produce a lot of videos about enlightenment because it's something I'm thinking about a lot these days. I'm trying to achieve. I suppose a good supplementary answer why enlightenment as well. In short, I think it's good for our mental health. Okay, because we're all nuts, having been brought up in this cracker's world. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I look at books on enlightenment and so on, and it's very much possible to read entire books and not get it at all. Some books, I think, are just deliberately obscure and they're trying to just make money. Some books, they explain it, but you only really get it after you've got it, if you know what I mean. Because it's something which is very slippery, the concept. It's very hard for people to grasp it properly. Whenever explaining it to people, they tend to transpose it into their own terms and miss the point. And there are lots of people who've been pursuing the Enlightenment path for years and years who don't actually really understand what they're doing and are therefore not quite focusing on the right things. So I want to try and give an explanation that is clear. And I've made other videos where I explain it as well, but I think each time you get a slightly different view of it, and it's going to click with different people. So I want to try and make it really clear now. Got some sirens going. This is the City of London. Well, I'm not in the City of London as such. I'm in London, Greater London. The city is just a little district in the centre, technically. But anyway. So, I'm going to avoid religious explanations, because Enlightenment kind of has these religious overtones, because Buddhism and Hinduism both kind of harp on about it. Although they leave users with the impression that enlightenment is really only for the special few. But it isn't, and it certainly isn't anymore. Maybe it will have been in the past, I don't know, but now we need it. The world, humans are too powerful and too dangerous with our civilization and technology. We need to sort ourselves out quickly. So, what is enlightenment? It is where our brain's default mode has been reprogrammed so that we are identified with our true fundamental self rather than our constructed false self. That's it in a nutshell. I now need to talk about what the heck that means. Okay. As adults, we're going through our lives, and our brains have been programmed essentially by genetics, but particularly by our upbringings in this world, and it applies to almost everyone, certainly the vast, vast majority, like 99.99%, something like that, that our childhood programming has resulted in a created, fabricated personality which sits on top like a superstructure on top of our actual natural selves, if you like, our biological personality, as it were. And the issue is that this constructed personality it's adequate for survival, but it's in a normal Stone Age environment, but it is increasingly harmful in a technological environment, and it's harmful even in those ancient terms as well, I would say. But it does get children through childhood, which is the point. It's just that as adults, we actually don't need it anymore, and we would be better abandoning it. So, first a bit about the true self, as it were, what I prefer to think of as our fundamental self, what's underneath all the superstructure. That is essentially consciousness, as I see it. When we are going about our lives, we are sitting here with this chitter-chatter going on in our heads, usually blathering on about nonsense. And we identify with that, we get taken up into it. It's very like dreaming, and I think it's the same process. I think when we're asleep, our brain is chattering then too, and the brain produces images to illustrate it all, and we see dreams. During the daytime, it's much more verbal, certainly for the vast majority of people. But if you track back a little bit in your awareness, you will see that there are images associated with those verbal thoughts too. It's just that they're not vivid like they are when we're asleep. So it is dreaming, I think. And just to distinguish it, the word is daydreaming, of course. But it's fantasy. And actually harmful to us. It causes defects in perception, errors in socializing, personality disorders, depressions, and lots more. This is my opinion because stuff hasn't been studied very much by science. There are some psychologists who study it, but there isn't much work done as yet. It's not well understood. But I'm going by my own experience, if you like. And, well, the upshot is that this daydreaming self stops us actually experiencing our lives. We're wandering around lost in thought, and we're just ignoring the world around us, literally. When you get that Satori experience, the waking up experience, it's when you stop thinking for a bit and realise, oh, the world is here. I can hear stuff. You can just go out to a park, like or into nature, and just listen to the environment. Or just look at the colours of the lights, the sunlight on the leaves and stuff like that. But as soon as the mind starts blathering, you're daydreaming again, and you've lost it. If you can stop that, you get back to it. The experience is like waking up. And I think that is what is happening, apart from the technical nature of sleep and hormones and stuff. In terms of subjective experience, it is a waking up from a kind of dreaming sleep. And this I think is why the religions refer to it as awakening. Now, they also refer to the false self, as it were, the superstructure, as the ego. I'm not certain that it's identical to the Freudian ego, but it's certainly similar. It's that kind of thing. If you listen to or watch children playing, for example, especially if they're playing by themselves or maybe quietly with one or two friends, the younger ones, they will narrate their playing to themselves. So they'll have their toys and they'll have them talking to each other and they'll speak it out loud. And it seems to me that what they are doing is programming their own brains on how to survive in the world. They're learning stuff through play, and what they're learning is how to be. And in the current world, it seems essential that they do this. They construct a personality by trying out, through play, they're trying out different ways of living. Okay. And they're verbalizing it, they're coming up with phrases, they're copying phrases their parents or teachers have said to them, programming it in, and eventually it becomes an automatic personality, a superstructure on top of themselves that allows them to fit in as they see it into their world, because they are wholly dependent on adults to survive, especially the nuclear family, parents, guardians. So they teach themselves how to behave so as to be loved, or at least how to get what they need, depending on how egregious their environment is. Right. So, I don't know, for me, for example, I don't know how or why this came to be, but as an infant I must have decided somewhere that I should push my emotions down a notch or two, or three, and up my intellectual side, boost that. So I'm kind of, my superstructure personality is more intellectual than it is emotional. So Smarty Marty is useful for vlogging and stuff, right? Perfect, actually. So I can pick him up and use him for that sort of thing. Fine. What we do as humans, though, is having programmed ourselves, we forget that we've programmed ourselves, and we think that this programmed entity is the real us. So when the verbal mind, which is maintaining this self, this person, is chattering, we are taken up into it, we daydream it, we believe it is us. We are wholly invested in it. And again, as children, they can't act, they wholly invest in what they think they need to do to survive. But as adults, this is obsolete. Mostly. Possibly if you live in some brutal dictatorship, or when you're at work you need to kowtow to the boss or something, and you can put on a false personality. It's fine if you know that this is false, and drop it when you don't need it. But it's not fine if you forget. And the point is that we have almost universally forgotten our childhood programming, and the fact that it is just habits we adopted in order to get by. So the verbal mind is maintaining this false self, this superstructure, this ego. And when you think about thoughts or observe thoughts, you'll get to realize that an enormous proportion of our thinking relates to maintaining this image to present to the world, the persona, the false mask. In fact, almost all of our verbal thoughts, behind them is a bigging up of the self, being smarter, stronger, better, more of a victim, more sad, more of whatever you've chosen as your survival mechanism as a young child. And of course, as children, we don't really understand what we're doing, and we make all sorts of arbitrary and wrong decisions about how to survive. But it works. We're here. We've got through childhood, we're adults. Whatever it was, it has worked. And nature being what it is, there's no obvious reason to get rid of it. So there isn't much of a mechanism for getting rid of it. There is a mechanism for getting rid of it, and it happens to some people naturally. But for most people it doesn't happen naturally. We have to know what we're doing, which I'll get on to. I might as well talk about it now, because I'm there. I'm looking at my notes. I've made a little mind map of it all, right? How do you reprogram? I mean, you're not going to sit around with toys and talk to each other and reprogram that way, because that would just make another superstructure. Some people have a dramatic enlightenment experience where they suddenly have the realization and bang, they are it for the rest of their lives. They're enlightened. The superstructure is gone, wallop, or it's sidelined dramatically. But for most people that's not the case. I think it's something to do with like schizophrenics and multiple personality disorder. They have a situation where they might have a one kind of weak personality which is mostly in control. But when the situation gets too tough, it's just suddenly switched out and a new one takes over, which can handle a situation. And then that one's put aside and the original one comes back to deal with the rest of life. It's hypothesized that there is like some executive programmer in the brain, some executive programming function, which observes how you're doing and can dramatically reprogram you at a stroke at times, or prepares an alternative program to slot out and slot in if necessary. When you have multiple personality disorder, each personality tends to be less than 100%. It's missing features. But between them they kind of do the job, and the cure for that is to integrate them all into a new single false superstructure. Enlightenment is where you take this false superstructure and you chuck it away. Okay? Or at least you disidentify with it, so you realise it's just a mechanism and it's not you. And not only do you realise it intellectually, you feel it by default. That is your default state. Your default mode has been reprogrammed so that that superstructure is just one more tool for you to pick up as and when you need it. And it is not there dominating your awareness all the time. So how do you do the reprogramming as an adult, or even as a a late child or a teen or something? You could do it. The traditional method is meditation, but this is widely misunderstood and not clearly described by the practitioners. So let me sum up the point of it. Meditation is where you focus your attention on something and notice when your verbal mind starts blathering and you start daydreaming again. And each time you notice it, you set it aside and go back to focusing. The key thing about meditation is not the focusing, it's the setting aside of the thinking. That is actually important. People kind of think that when they start thinking, it's interrupting my meditation. No, that is your meditation practice, is to see when you're thinking and set it aside. That setting aside is the reprogramming process. Each time you set it aside, you're creating a habit in your brain. You're adding one more. Oh, I set it aside. I think stuff, set it aside. Thinking garbage, set it aside. every time, as much as you can. When you're thinking garbage, daydreaming, set it aside. Whoosh. Now, it's important to do this gently, not angrily or with any negative emotion, because we have built-in mechanisms to protect us from things which cause us negative emotions. You know, if you are stung by a wasp or something, you're going to be terrified of wasps thereafter, and when you see them, you'll have negative emotion. Your body will react to protect you from them, right, automatically. And your mind too, come to that. So if you are setting aside your thoughts with an angry, unpleasant emotion, the system's going to resist you. Because it's unpleasant. So you do it gently, or with a bit of a laugh. Oh, I'm thinking again. Hee hee. Or pat yourself on the head. Oh, I don't need to think about that anymore. It's all right. Just leave it for now. If it's important, it'll come back. Don't worry. So do it in a happy, jokey. Oh, I've noticed it again. Be pleased that you've noticed it. Right? That's a good way. Set it aside. Again and again and again. Thousands of times. All throughout the day you can do this. Because you don't have to sit there meditating and focusing on your breathing or anything of the sort. You can. You can also, just as you're going through your life, you can be listening to the ambient sounds. You can be looking at what's going on around you, focusing, right? And when you notice the focus is lost and your verbal mind is blathering, oh, I'm thinking again, I don't need to. Go back to the focusing. You can be in flow, in sports, at work, doing a painting or something, whatever you do, you can be fully focused on that. And when there is thinking there, it's fully focused on the goal, that's fine. That's not daydreaming. Daydreaming is when you're maintaining the ego, the false self, the superstructure, when you're just blathering stuff which is conditioned in you as a child, which you taught yourself, or which your parents taught you, your teachers, etc., etc. Stock phrases which go round and around and around forever. You notice these schizophrenic hobos on the streets saying stock phrases to themselves again and again. We do this as well. We just don't say it out loud. When you've observed enough, you'll notice it's a bit shocking. Okay, how we are. So it's an easy exercise to do. You just have to do it. If you're going to reprogram your default mode so that the thoughts are set aside, you have to do it lots of times unless you have this big experience, which some people have. Over time you will see it gets easier and easier, and the thoughts do dominate less and less, but you can still go for hours and days without even realising, oh drat, I've been daydreaming, you know. Not too much of that negativeness, but just when you notice, oh yeah. Now of course it raises the question, surely we need to think about stuff. Yeah. But we don't need the thoughts which are maintaining this false superstructure, which is about 95% of them, to pluck a random figure out of the air, right? The vast majority of thoughts, as I mentioned, are related to who we think we should be, how to get love, how to be accepted, how not to be rejected, how not to be abandoned, whatever our particular shtick, fear, desire is. All of that is not necessary as an adult, and it actually gets in the way of our relating to our fellow human beings, in fact. The distorted self, which was needed for a child of limited understanding, is not needed for an adult in more or less decent circumstances. So you still think about stuff when verbal thinking is needed, and it's useful for communication and so on, obviously. It's just that something like 95% of the thinking that we do is traceable to maintaining this superstructure rather than being productive and beneficial, actually. And it's stressful, and it's depressing, and all the rest, because it undermines our confidence. While we believe in this superstructure, false self, we effectively are undermining ourselves, because it's like, my true self isn't good enough. And you can't get away from that while you're believing in a false self, which has to be good enough. I think the sirens are telling me it's time to finish. Have I been clear with that? Does it make sense? Have you noticed any of this? Do you have any viewpoints on this? Or am I wrong about something? Leave your comments. I'm interested to know. I'm also thinking vaguely of maybe arranging meetups in London, because there don't seem to be any outside of meditation organisations and so on. Speaking of meditation, I don't think the transcendental type where you chant a mantra is really that helpful, because that's using the verbal mind to plaster over itself. I'm not sure maybe it works for some people, but it seems to me that just focusing on simple things is enough and is easier. Anyway, what do you think? Bye for now.